You're listening to the Full Court Press with your host, Drew Duncan. Don't you dare touch that dial. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Full Court Press. I'm your host, Drew Duncan. You guys are checking me out live from the K-Sun Studios out here in Wichita, Kansas. As always, you can be a part of the program by tweeting me. That's at DrewDuncan83. If you're on Facebook, you can follow me there and get at me at DrewDuncan83. You can also talk to me on Instagram at DrewDuncan83. Be sure to get your comments read live over the radio. Florida with a miracle win over the Tennessee Volunteers on the final play of the game, a Hail Mary. You heard it right. It couldn't have been described any better, right, by Brad Nessler. Hell of a call at the end of that football game. Look, this game was kind of an anomaly to me. Now, I'm sitting there watching this, and I'm trying to figure out, like, who the good team is, to be honest with you. Yeah, obviously, I think after the Michigan game, not a lot of us expected anything out of Florida. And to be perfectly real with you, I still don't. Look, it's a hell of a play at the end, but without trying to be Captain Obvious here, how do you not have, 8 guys back there in the end zone waiting? Instead, you just press up on everybody, and then you have one safety over the top, and you allow a guy to get loose, and that's how they win the football game. And look, I'm going to give a lot of credit because that throw was phenomenal. Was it 65 yards total? Yeah, it was a 63-yard touchdown pass. But from where he threw it and from where the ball landed, was it 65, 66 yards in the air? And by the way, that play, the only passing play that the Florida Gators had that was longer than 10 yards the entire game. Tennessee with umpteen opportunities to put this game out of reach, missing field goals, turnovers, penalties. And Florida had plenty of turnovers and penalties too. It was kind of a sloppy game to watch. Just keeping it real with you. I walk away from this game and I think to myself, great win for the Florida Gators, bad win for the Florida Gators, and probably an even worse loss for the Tennessee Volunteers, who, by the way, this was the Tennessee way of doing things last year, right? All the miracle plays at the end of the game, Hail Marys, overtime wins. I just don't think that either one of those teams are really good. Obviously, Alabama's going to be the team in the SEC, period, especially after what we saw LSU get skunked out by Mississippi State. It's Alabama's to lose. I mean, who's there? Georgia, maybe? I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like, I don't know anymore. Because, I watched that game, and I just thought it was a bad game by both teams. It was so sloppy. It became frustrating to watch. I'm just sitting there watching this game like, man, again, are you kidding me? By the way, the first half of that football game, yawn. And I try hard not to take anything away, especially when I'm talking about college kids. But, sometimes you just got to keep it real. And just, you watch that game and you went, hell of an ending, right? Great ending. But with the way both teams played, I can't see either one of them coming out of the SEC title. More college football, Texas and USC, speaking of overtime games. How good is USC really? They beat Stanford, okay. But Stanford just got beat again. So they're already out of any discussion of a college football playoff as if they were ever in there in the first place. Texas loses to Maryland. And now they've lost to USC in a tight one. I just don't like the way the season is going for the USC Trojans. I think the Pac-12 is easy enough for them to get out of. But if they do get to a college football playoff, does anybody legitimately think that they're going to be able to contend with Clemson right now after the way they smoked Louisville? Does anybody really think that USC is going to be able to contend with Alabama after the way they dominated Florida State? Does anybody think they'd be able to hang with even an Ohio State or an Oklahoma or a Penn State. It's just why I don't think polls should come out until the end of week 4. I don't think USC would be ranked that high, but they're going to get ranked higher now because of where, they started out high, so they're going to be high. Let's be honest with you. Texas is not that good of a football team, and I don't think there's really anybody in the Big 12 outside of OU, maybe Oklahoma State, that has any kind of a defense. USC struggled for the better part of that game. How confident are you in Sam Darnold? Everybody's been talking about Darnold for president, basically. The hype train is all over USC, and I just, for one, am not buying it. UCLA gets beat by Memphis. Oregon has a hard time beating Nebraska, and Nebraska has a hard time beating Liberty, and then they turn around and get blown out. I just, RIP Nebraska football. Point is, if Oregon has a hard time with Nebraska, Stanford has already lost 2 games. USC has a hard time with Texas, who had already got beat by Maryland. Does anybody really think that there's anybody in the Pac-12 that can legitimately contest with anybody else in the country? Because I think all the best football right now is being played in the Big Ten, the ACC. That's where it is. And Alabama apparently is the only team in the SEC. I may be overlooking Georgia, but I don't think so. There's nobody to contend with in the Pac-12. So location. Part of it is I've never really been a big fan of the Pac-12. I've always been under the impression that the conference is a little overrated. And I know a lot of people can jump on me for, the titles that USC and the things that they did back in the early 2000s. But really, when you start thinking about all the great football dynasties in the 70s and 80s and 90s and 2000s and now into the 2010s, has anybody out of the West Coast really been considered a dynasty? The one dynasty that the USC Trojans had ended up being tainted with all the alleged scandals and everything that happened behind it. Other than that, it's been teams like Oklahoma, Florida, Nebraska, Miami for a very long time, Florida State, Ohio State won a national title. The SEC dominated for a long time with LSU and Alabama and Florida. Does anybody remember the last time the Pac-12 had any kind of dynasty to it at all? Well, not just one team, but a dynasty, like a real dynasty. Oregon got beat in 2 title games. I'm not buying the Pac-12. Nor am I taking real stock in the USC. This could be the first college football playoff where we see 2 teams out of one conference get in. I really think this could be the first time it happens. I know that the word around the street is that you're going to have to win your conference in order to be able to get in. Well, this year may be a little bit different. Because if USC takes 2 losses, Stanford's already got 2 losses. I don't see Oregon winning more than 8 or 9 games. Then what do? Just because they're the conference champion? Washington State? Come on. We saw it last year with Colorado. How about UCLA and Memphis? There were parts of that game that were really sloppy too. Was it 3 turnovers by both football teams? But if you watch that game, I am telling you what, you were in for a treat because the Memphis-Tigers have got a wide receiver by the name of Anthony Miller, and that dude is an all-out beast. Number one, here's some things that I love from Memphis as a team that day. Blocking from the wide receiver position, the way that they could seal off entire sections of the football field, the linemen, the running backs, the tight ends, the wide receivers, everybody worked together to make that happen. And every time it looked like one team was out of it, the other team would find a way to get back in it. And I'm telling you what, that Riley Ferguson kid, he can sling it. Now, it's easy to look good when you got a guy like Miller as your wide receiver. But I'm telling you what, the awareness of a Riley Ferguson, the way that he was looking downfield on every single play, it didn't matter if he was trying to scramble or not, the toughness that this kid showed, the moxie in the pocket, all the things that you constantly hear quarterbacks talked about in that sort of way, that's exactly what Riley Ferguson was. I mean, he looked like a pro. Riley Ferguson and Miller, those guys look like NFL material players on that day. By the way, Memphis now, 3 years in a row, have defeated a top 25 opponent in their home field, and 2 of them have been out-of-conference teams. UCLA, everybody remembers the Auburn game. Now, the antithesis to that is, before we all start riding our Memphis hype train, is that Auburn didn't finish very well. I don't anticipate UCLA finishing very well. I know that they had that big comeback against Texas A&M, and so a lot of people were talking about Rosen. But, the things that I saw with Rosen in that football game, he does have a good arm. The thing is, though, he can't handle the blitz. If you pressure this kid at all, he doesn't make good decisions. He gets a little bit rattled under pressure, turns the football over a lot. I personally don't think he's an NFL guy. Look, in the NFL, you're not always going to have time to throw the football. You're going to ask Trevor Siemian and Alex Smith about that. You're not always going to have time to throw the football, man. Just about any quarterback in the world can hurt you if they've got time to scan the field. If I've got 10 seconds to throw, I promise you I'm going to find somebody. We saw him force plays. There was one time when he was scrambling, Rosen was, and he throws it back across his body right into the lap of a defender. Now, initially, where he was trying to go with the football, he was open, but he was late. See, late read. Then across his body, trying to force the issue. Play wasn't there. He threw a pick 6 in that football game, and that was actually that play. You want to beat teams like Memphis in their own backyard that are doing everything that they can to say that we got that signature win for the season. You don't turn the football over. And you damn sure don't let them take it back to the end zone. And even then they had a chance at the end of that game. Memphis took a huge risk. They took a big risk at the end of that football game. Instead of just going for the field goal and going up 51-45, they decided to run a fake pass. Unsuccessful. And when UCLA was trying to drive at the end of that football game, the only receiver who had really done anything on a consistent basis was his tight end Wilson, who just looked gassed at the end of that football game. He just wasn't able to handle it. I'm not buying the Josh Rosen hype. I'm not buying the UCLA train. I'm not into it. Memphis converted 4th downs in that game. They took advantage of penalties that went their way. UCLA did have a couple of drives in that football game that were very impressive, i.e. the one that put them up 45-41 late in that ball game. They were pinned deep in their own territory. They started out with a good draw play. They just weren't able to stop Memphis defensively, and the turnovers at the end of the day were what beat the UCLA Bruins. Again, that's why I just don't think the Pac-12 is all that strong. One big reason why anyways. Folks, we got a lot more to get to. The Kansas City Chiefs, the Philadelphia Eagles. We're going to be talking about that. We're going to start digging deeper into the college football scenario. We're going to be previewing the NFL game tonight. There's a lot more show to get to. This is the Full Court Press. I am your host, Drew Duncan. You guys are checking me out live from the K-Sun Studios out here in Wichita, Kansas. You can be a part of the program by tweeting me at DrewDuncan83, by hitting me up on Facebook at DrewDuncan83, or by talking to me on Instagram at DrewDuncan83. We're going to take a quick sponsor break. We'll be back on the flip side. Don't you dare touch that dial.